When you look at Indochina on a map, it seems small, just coastlines, rivers, and thin borders. But in the 20th century, that small space became a pressure point for an entire world order. Hear the rotor blades, the crackle of a field radio, the tight pulse underneath. Because this was never only a war inside Vietnam. It began in the long aftermath of empire, and it unfolded under the cold logic of the Cold War. For more than a decade, the conflict escalated step by step, each decision narrowing the exits. Millions of lives were pulled into the current. Soldiers on patrol, pilots in the sky, families in villages caught between forces, leaders in distant capitals weighing choices that looked simple on paper and brutal on the ground. It reshaped Vietnam, and it changed the United States in politics, trust, and identity. You can see this war in 3 places at once. In the jungle, where the horizon disappears, and one shot can trigger chaos. In the cities, where the battlefield is not far away, but right there, street by street, under the eyes of ordinary people trying to survive. And far from the gunfire, in command rooms and negotiation halls, where maps cover tables and words are chosen as carefully as weapons. But the real questions still hang in the air. Why did the United States become so deeply involved in Vietnam? Why did the war keep expanding year after year, even as the costs climbed and the end moved farther away? And what truly brought it to a close? Military outcomes, political limits, public opinion, or a breaking point in national will? In the next 20 minutes, we'll follow a clear, compressed timeline. The origins that set the stage, the moment the conflict became an American war, the turning points that changed everything, the long road toward withdrawal, and the final collapse that closed the chapter. Not to trade slogans, but to understand how this war unfolded, and why its legacy still echoes today. To understand why the Vietnam War became so consuming, we have to step back before the first American combat troops ever landed. Look again at the map. Vietnam sits along the edge of mainland Southeast Asia, facing the South China Sea, close to China, and tied by history and geography to Laos and Cambodia. After World War II, this region wasn't just a place, it was a crossroads of power. The Cold War turned Vietnam into a flashpoint because global rivalries began to flow through local conflicts, and every decision started to feel like a test of credibility. In 1945, as the old empires weakened, Vietnamese nationalists declared independence. But the post-war world did not settle quietly. France moved to reassert control, and what followed was the First Indochina War. Years of brutal, grinding conflict shaped by guerrilla warfare, hard terrain, and political will. It was not a simple story of armies on open fields. It was a struggle over legitimacy, over who would govern, and over whether Vietnam would return to being a colony or become something else entirely. By the early 1950s, the war had become a major international concern, with outside powers watching closely and calculating what a victory or defeat would mean beyond Vietnam's borders. In 1954, that conflict ended decisively with the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu, an event that signaled the collapse of France's position in Indochina and forced the world to negotiate what came next. The Geneva Conference that followed produced a temporary solution, not a final peace. Vietnam was divided along a line near the 17th parallel, with the north governed by the Democratic Republic of Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh, and the south evolving under separate leadership and institutions. The division was meant to be provisional, a pause that would lead to political settlement. But in practice, it hardened into 2 competing states, each claiming the future of the entire country. In the north, the AOA leadership framed the struggle as national unification under a revolutionary government. In the south, leaders framed their cause as building a non-communist Vietnam aligned with the West. The line on the map became more than geography. It became a boundary of ideology, identity, and survival. From 1955 to 1963, the United States moved deeper into the South, not as a main combatant yet, but as a sponsor and strategist. Washington's logic was shaped by containment and by the domino theory, the fear that if one country fell to communism, neighboring states would follow. Aid increased, advisors arrived, training programs expanded. The goal was clear: help build a stable South Vietnamese state that could defeat an insurgency and stand on its own. But stability proved elusive. The South faced political turmoil, questions of legitimacy, deep rural grievances, and a growing armed movement that drew strength from local networks and from support coming through the wider region. By 1960, the insurgency had consolidated under the National Liberation Front, known in the United States as the Viet Cong, intensifying a conflict that was no longer just political rivalry, but war in the countryside, quiet, persistent, and hard to measure. And this is where the fatal mismatch begins to form, the setup for everything that comes next. The political objective was to create a durable, credible government in South Vietnam. But the reality on the ground was shaped by terrain, by village-level loyalties, by fear and coercion, and by an enemy that could disappear into the population and reappear on its own terms. American planners wanted progress that could be counted, secure areas, trained units, visible control. Yet the war was increasingly fought in shadows, where a map could look stable by day and collapse by night. As the gap widened between political goals and battlefield reality, the pressure to do more kept rising. And step by step, that pressure would pull the United States from advising a war into fighting one. In 1964, the war crosses a threshold. Up to this point, Washington has tried to shape events through advisors, aid, and pressure behind the scenes, hoping South Vietnam could survive without turning the conflict into a major American war. But in the summer, a confrontation in the Gulf of Tonkin becomes the moment that opens the valve. In the United States, the incident is treated as proof that the situation is spiraling beyond control. Congress passes the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, expanding presidential authority and making it far easier to escalate. It is not a single switch, but it is a doorway, and once stepped through, the options begin to narrow. By early 1965, American strategy moves from patience to pressure. A sustained bombing campaign begins against North Vietnam, designed to disrupt support, signal resolve, and convince Hanoi that continuing the war will only bring greater costs. The logic seems straightforward: raise the price, force a change in behavior, shorten the conflict. But war rarely follows the logic of plans. Bombing becomes a long campaign of escalation and adjustment, measured in sorties and targets, while the fighting inside South Vietnam continues to intensify. The air war is meant to influence decisions, yet the ground war remains the arena where control, legitimacy, and survival are decided. Then, in 1965, the transformation becomes visible to the world. U.S. Marines land at Da Nang, and American combat troops arrive in large numbers. The mission is no longer primarily advising, it is fighting. From this point forward, every month adds momentum, and the idea of an easy exit fades, replaced by the demands of escalation. Commanders speak of bringing superior mobility and overwhelming firepower to a battlefield defined by jungle, rice paddies, rivers, and sudden contact. Helicopters turn distance into minutes. Fire bases rise on ridgelines. In early major engagements, such as the fighting in the Ia Drang Valley, American forces discover what will define the war for years: the ability to strike hard and move fast, and the reality that the enemy can absorb punishment, disengage, and return on terms of their own choosing. The United States has entered a conflict where the battlefield does not behave like the wars it remembers. From 1966 through 1967, the conflict becomes a grinding contest of attrition. Under General William Westmoreland, American forces pursue search and destroy operations, aiming to locate enemy units, fix them in place, and overwhelm them with artillery and air support. Success is often counted in body counts and claimed enemy losses, because territory can be taken and then surrendered again, and control can evaporate as soon as troops move on. Patrols push through dense vegetation where visibility collapses, where heat and exhaustion are constant, and where danger arrives without warning. Big unit sweeps and helicopter assaults can produce intense battles, but the strategic question lingers in the background. Does defeating an enemy formation today actually translate into a safer countryside tomorrow? This approach inflicts heavy losses, but it also carries a hidden cost. The more the war is measured by numbers, the more it can drift away from the political goal, building a stable South Vietnamese state with legitimacy and security. A village is not truly won if it returns to fear after the soldiers leave. A province is not stable if the government exists mainly on paper. Pacification programs attempt to secure rural life, build local administration, and deny the insurgency access to people and resources. Yet security remains fragile where authority is contested and trust is scarce. The war becomes a struggle not only over terrain, but over governance, loyalty, and the daily reality of civilians caught in the middle. At the same time, the war is being fought on another front: public perception. This is the first major conflict to unfold nightly in living rooms. Television brings images of patrols, burning landscapes, and exhausted troops into ordinary homes. Reporters describe battles almost in real time. At home, protests expand and diversify. Families argue. Universities become political arenas. Questions about the draft, casualties, and purpose divide communities. A credibility gap opens between official optimism and the grinding reality people see on screens and feel through loss. The central question becomes unavoidable. Are we winning, or are we only fighting? By late 1967, American leaders claim the enemy is being worn down and that the end is coming into view. But beneath the surface, the other side is preparing something designed not simply to win a battle, but to break confidence. That tension explodes in 1968. During the Tet holiday, coordinated attacks erupt across South Vietnam, including in major cities. Militarily, many of these attacks are repelled, and the attackers suffer severe losses. But the psychological impact is immediate and profound. For years, Americans have been told the enemy is weakening, that major strikes are no longer possible. Yet suddenly, the images show the war everywhere at once, on streets, near government compounds, in places that were supposed to be secure. Tet becomes less a military defeat than a shock to belief. It damages the idea that the war is nearing a clean victory, and it forces a national reassessment of what progress even means. In Washington, the implications are enormous. The political foundation for unlimited escalation begins to crack. Decisions shift from how to win quickly to how to end without collapse. President Lyndon Johnson announces he will not seek re-election and signals limits on bombing, opening a path towards negotiations. Talks begin in Paris, but peace is not a switch that can be flipped. Negotiations move slowly, tangled in demands, mistrust, and the belief on both sides that time may still deliver advantage. While diplomats speak, soldiers continue to fight. The war has reached a point where strategy and politics cannot be separated, because the outcome now depends as much on endurance and legitimacy as on firepower. From 1969 onward, the United States adopts a strategy known as Vietnamization. The goal is to transfer the burden of combat to South Vietnamese forces while gradually withdrawing American troops. Under President Richard Nixon, U.S. troop levels fall from their peak. Training and equipment increase for the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, while American air power and advisors continue to play major roles. In public, this is framed as a path to peace with honor, reducing American casualties while maintaining a non-communist South. On the battlefield, it means South Vietnamese units are asked to carry more of the fight, more of the risk, and more of the political burden, while the United States tries to shape the outcome from a step farther back. At the same time, the war widens beyond Vietnam's borders. In 1970, U.S. and South Vietnamese forces move into Cambodia to strike sanctuaries and supply routes. In 1971, operations extend into Laos in an effort to disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the lifeline that sustains movement and supply. These moves are justified as necessary to shorten the war and protect withdrawals, but they ignite fierce controversy at home and deepen regional instability. Protest movements intensify, political divisions harden, and the war, already costly overseas, becomes a crisis inside American society, where trust in leadership and institutions continues to erode. By 1972, the conflict reaches another peak of urgency. North Vietnamese forces launch a major conventional offensive, testing whether South Vietnam can stand without U.S. ground troops. The United States responds with heavy air power, including renewed bombing campaigns intended to blunt the offensive and push negotiations toward a settlement. The battlefield becomes a contest of endurance, armor and artillery, airstrikes and supply lines, morale and leadership. The war has changed shape, from slow patrols and ambushes to large-scale offensives where territory, cities, and transport routes matter intensely. Both sides understand that military pressure and diplomatic positioning are now linked, and the outcome may hinge on who can absorb strain the longest. In January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords are signed. The agreement allows for the withdrawal of U.S. combat forces and the return of American prisoners of war, and it sets terms meant to stabilize a ceasefire. But the central truth is unavoidable. The United States is leaving the battlefield, and the war inside Vietnam is not truly resolved. Fighting continues in contested areas where ceasefire lines exist mostly on paper. America's role shrinks to aid and diplomacy, while the balance of power inside Vietnam becomes increasingly decisive. The question is no longer whether the United States can win outright, but whether South Vietnam can endure once the American presence is gone. Then the final phase arrives with stunning speed. In 1974 and early 1975, South Vietnam faces mounting pressure as the balance shifts and external support weakens. A series of rapid offensives collapses defenses faster than many expected. Cities fall, routes clog, units break, and the conflict becomes a race between military reality and political time. In April 1975, Saigon becomes the symbol of the ending. The moment the world recognizes that the long chapter has closed, the American war is over, but the consequences, the memory, and the debates it unleashed are only beginning to settle. So what did the Vietnam War ultimately leave behind? In military and political terms, it ended with a unified Vietnam under the government in Hanoi, while the United States closed a long chapter of intervention that had expanded far beyond its original aims. The outcome was not only a change of control on the map, but the final proof that modern war cannot be defined by firepower alone when the political foundation is unstable. In social terms, the war reshaped lives on a massive scale. Through displacement, grief, long-term trauma, and a generation marked by loss and memory. And in geopolitical terms, Vietnam became a lasting symbol of Cold War limits, influencing how nations judged intervention, alliance commitments, and the real cost of credibility when it is measured in years of conflict. The war also left lessons that still matter. First, political objectives must match military strategy. When the goal is unclear, or when the battlefield method cannot realistically produce the political end state, victories on paper can still lead to strategic failure. Second, Vietnam proved that information is not a side issue. Public trust, media coverage, and national unity are part of the battlefield. If leaders cannot explain the purpose, define progress honestly, and maintain credibility over time, even the strongest military advantage can become fragile. Third, Vietnam exposed the limits of technology against terrain and asymmetric warfare. Helicopters, sensors, air power, and overwhelming fire support could win battles, but they could not automatically secure villages, control loyalties, or erase an enemy that understood the ground, adapted quickly, and chose when and where to fight. But beyond strategy and politics, the war is also a human story. It is remembered by veterans who carried the weight of the jungle and the noise of combat long after returning home. It is remembered by families who never saw a loved one return, and by civilians who lived through fear, disruption, and impossible choices. It is remembered not only in archives and photographs, but in quiet moments. Letters, names, and stories passed down, often incomplete, often painful, and always real. And that is why this documentary is only the beginning. In the next episode, we will zoom in on one critical turning point, 1 year, one campaign, or one battle, and rebuild it with an hour-by-hour timeline. What commanders believed, what soldiers saw, and how the situation changed minute by minute. If you want the full series, each case file, each operation, each turning point, subscribe now and join us as we trace the Vietnam War step by step through the moments that shaped history.